Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. The most unsettling people in history weren't the ones who burned cities. They were the ones who stood still and made everyone else expose themselves. Here's the part nobody prepares you for. When people hear the words earth angel, they imagine softness, innocence, someone who can be pushed around with guilt, silence, or emotional pressure. They picture a gentle soul who will absorb chaos, forgive endlessly, and never push back. That image is comfortable, safe, predictable, and completely wrong. Because an earth angel who has seen enough doesn't arrive loud. They arrive clear. And clarity is deeply inconvenient for people who survive by confusion. There's a documented psychological fact that unsettles manipulators more than confrontation. Calm, consistent behavior, paired with unshakable moral boundaries, increases anxiety and loss of control in deceptive personalities. Not shouting, not revenge, just stability. When someone can't provoke you, can't rush you, and can't emotionally hijack you, their internal system starts malfunctioning. That's not spirituality. That's neuroscience wearing a halo. And this is where the mistake was made. They assumed your compassion meant compliance. They mistook your patience for weakness. They thought kindness came without memory. They underestimated how dangerous a clean conscience becomes once it stops explaining itself. Somewhere along the line, they realized something wasn't adding up. You weren't breaking. You weren't reacting. You weren't becoming bitter, chaotic, or loud like they expected. You were improving. That's when the fear crept in quietly, like a bad thought they couldn't shake. There's even a little irony here, almost comedic if it wasn't so revealing. The very people who pride themselves on being realistic, street smart, or seasoned ended up intimidated by someone who simply refused to play dirty. Imagine losing psychological ground to someone who didn't cheat, didn't lie, didn't manipulate, and still walked away standing taller. That's a humbling experience. Some might even call it character development they didn't ask for. This isn't about being holy. It's about being intact. It's about what happens when someone who once absorbed everything decides to filter. When empathy gains boundaries. When light stops trying to convince darkness to change and simply lets it reveal itself. They never thought an earth angel could be more terrifying than a devil, because they misunderstood what you were here to do. You weren't sent to fight monsters. You were sent to end illusions. And once illusions collapse, everything else follows. Number 1, you didn't defeat darkness by becoming soft. You defeated it by becoming precise. People assumed your goodness would make you easy to guilt, easy to pressure, easy to confuse. They thought compassion meant unlimited access, and forgiveness meant no consequences. What they didn't understand is that goodness without precision is naivete, and you outgrew that phase the hard way. You learned that being kind doesn't mean being careless, and being loving doesn't mean being available to disrespect. Precision is what changed everything. You stopped reacting emotionally to bait. You stopped explaining yourself to people who already decided to misunderstand you. You stopped offering grace where accountability was required. That wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. And clarity is terrifying to people who survive by blurring lines. You became selective with your energy, your words, and your presence. Not because you hardened, but because you finally respected yourself enough to stop leaking. You learned when to speak, and when silence wasn't noble but necessary. You learned when to walk away without drama, without closure, without speeches. That level of self-control unsettles people who depend on emotional chaos to feel powerful. What really shook them was this: you didn't change your values, you refined how you applied them. You still had compassion, but now it had structure. You still had patience, but now it had limits. You still cared, but not at the expense of your dignity. That balance made you unpredictable to those who thought they had you figured out. Darkness isn't confused by anger. It understands anger well. What it doesn't know how to deal with is someone who is calm, intentional, and impossible to provoke. Someone who won't fight dirty, but also won't tolerate nonsense. Someone who doesn't need revenge because distance already does the job. Your precision exposed motives without you saying a word. It showed people exactly where they stood based on how they treated your boundaries. And when they realized they couldn't cross you anymore, not emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, that's when the fear set in. You didn't overpower them. You outgrew them. You didn't become softer. You became exact. And that kind of growth doesn't just protect you. It dismantles everything that tried to misuse you. Number 2, your moral clarity exposed their inner corruption like harsh daylight. They thought they could hide behind lies, half-truths, and clever manipulations. They thought deception, charm, and intimidation would shield them forever. But they didn't account for one thing, your moral clarity. You weren't loud. You weren't dramatic. You weren't out to punish anyone. You simply stood in alignment with your truth, and that was enough to expose every weakness, every hypocrisy, every concealed agenda. When you live with integrity so deeply rooted that it becomes visible in your words, your actions, and even your silence, it's impossible for corruption to hide. Every lie they told, every scheme they plotted, and every mask they wore started cracking the moment they confronted someone who didn't bend. That clarity acts like harsh daylight in a room where shadows thought they were safe. And people who've built their lives on deception panic when light doesn't negotiate with them. You didn't have to accuse them or point fingers. You didn't have to confront them directly to make the truth undeniable. Your very existence forced them to confront themselves. They realized the discrepancies between their actions and their intentions, and the guilt and fear they thought they could suppress suddenly became unavoidable. They started overthinking every word, every glance, every plan, because your presence was a mirror they couldn't break. What terrified them wasn't that you were good. It wasn't even that you were strong. It was that your moral clarity made them weak. It forced them to see the parts of themselves they had spent years hiding or rationalizing. The realization that their darkness couldn't touch you because it had nowhere to latch on was a silent kind of terror, much worse than confrontation, much worse than aggression, because it's insidious and relentless. You didn't need power over them. You didn't need revenge. You simply needed to be untouchable in your ethics, untangled in your conscience, and unshakable in your principles. And that simple, honest alignment shattered the illusion of control they believed they had. When someone operates like that, their corruption isn't just exposed. It becomes powerless, irrelevant, and completely undone. Number 3, you learned how to hold power without becoming drunk on it. Power is a strange thing. Most people either fear it or let it consume them. They think the moment you gain influence, respect, or control over a situation, you have to become loud, aggressive, or arrogant to prove it. That's what made them underestimate you. They expected you to snap, to react, to let authority intoxicate you. What they didn't realize is that the real strength lies in holding power with composure, in letting it exist in you without letting it define you. You mastered the art of moving through influence silently, intentionally, and purposefully. You don't need to broadcast dominance to command respect. Your actions, your decisions, and the way you carry yourself communicate more than words ever could. That kind of power doesn't scream, it just exists. And that quiet presence is far more intimidating to those who rely on intimidation to feel superior. The people who tried to manipulate or control you didn't know what to do with someone who had authority but didn't abuse it. They expected chaos because that's how they operate. They expected reactive energy because that's all they know. When you showed up calm, measured, and unshaken, it broke their rhythm. Their tricks, threats, and schemes suddenly seemed amateurish because you weren't responding the way they predicted. You were above it, not above it in arrogance, but in mastery. What's even more terrifying to them is that you didn't need to prove anything. You didn't have to dominate, humiliate, or punish to establish your position. You simply existed in your power with intentionality, and it shifted the dynamics around you naturally. People who thrive on chaos and manipulation found themselves scrambling because your presence made them confront their own lack of control. Holding power without letting it consume you isn't just about self-discipline. It's about transforming influence into protection and strategy. It's about being unstoppable, not because you're ruthless, but because you're precise, grounded, and unshakable. And that combination, power without arrogance, is what made you more formidable than anyone expected, even more than anyone dared to predict. Number 4, you didn't mirror their evil. You made it visible. People thought the way to confront darkness was to meet it on its own level. They expected you to argue, to retaliate, to use deception and force in return. That's what they assumed an earth angel would do, or at least that's what they hoped for. What they didn't anticipate is that you didn't have to lower yourself to show them who they truly were. You didn't imitate their cruelty, their manipulation, or their scheming. You simply existed in your truth, and that alone reflected their darkness back at them with perfect clarity. When you stay grounded and unwavering in your integrity, everything they try to hide becomes obvious. Lies can't survive in the presence of consistency. Manipulation crumbles in front of discernment. The energy you carry exposes motives without a single accusation, and that's a kind of revelation people fear more than confrontation. It's uncomfortable because it's impossible to argue against someone who isn't reacting emotionally, someone whose every action aligns with their conscience. Your presence became a mirror they couldn't break. Every move they made, every scheme, every attempt at control was reflected back in ways that made them confront themselves. And the more they tried to twist, justify, or spin their behavior, the more transparent it became. What they had assumed would be hidden forever was now undeniably visible, and you didn't need to do anything to force it. The weight of their own choices started collapsing on them, quietly but relentlessly. What terrified them most wasn't anger, punishment, or revenge. It was the simple fact that they were fully seen, without exaggeration, without embellishment, without distortion. Your refusal to mirror their evil stripped them of their illusions and forced a reckoning they weren't prepared for. They realized that their darkness had limits. When confronted with someone who didn't play their game, but still exposed the rules. You didn't need to fight them or stoop to their level. Your clarity, consistency, and unwavering truth turned their own shadows against them, and in that quiet, unshakable way, you became a force they could neither predict nor control, making your presence more powerful and more terrifying than any battle they could have imagined. Number 5, you mastered the ability to walk away without collapsing. They assumed that every tie, every connection, every bond you had could be leveraged, manipulated, or broken. They expected you to crumble, to beg, to spiral emotionally when they pushed too hard, when they betrayed trust, or when they tested boundaries. What they didn't realize is that you learned how to leave situations, people, and toxic dynamics without losing yourself. Walking away became not a weakness, but a declaration of power they couldn't comprehend. Walking away isn't just leaving physically, it's leaving emotionally intact. You stop tying your self-worth to approval, validation, or acceptance. You stop negotiating your peace for temporary relief, and you stopped allowing anyone to dictate your value. That skill, the ability to remove yourself and still remain whole, is what terrified them. They had invested in the illusion that absence, distance, or rejection would make you vulnerable. They were wrong. Your departure carried no fanfare, no emotional outburst, no dramatics. It carried calm, precision, and certainty. That's what made it devastating. They expected chaos, tears, or reaction. Instead, they got control slipping through their fingers, not because you were passive, but because you were intentional. You preserved your energy, your dignity, and your clarity while they scrambled, confused by their inability to elicit the chaos they relied on to feel superior. What they feared most was the realization that they had no leverage over you anymore. They couldn't manipulate your emotions, push your buttons, or trap you in cycles of guilt or fear. You became untouchable, not invincible, but self-contained, self-reliant, and unwavering. That ability to walk away without collapse dismantled their power quietly, leaving them questioning everything they thought they knew about control, dominance, and influence. You didn't just survive the act of leaving, you owned it. Every step away was a statement. Your life, your peace, and your energy are non-negotiable. And that clarity, that discipline, that refusal to be broken by absence or abandonment, became a force far stronger than any confrontation could ever be. They were left exposed, powerless, and terrified of the calm you carried while they flailed. Number 6, you carry authority that doesn't need permission. Most people think authority comes from titles, recognition, or validation. They believe respect must be earned through applause, fear, or influence over others. That's where they miscalculated you. You didn't wait for approval, endorsement, or permission to step into your power. Your presence alone commanded attention, shifted dynamics, and set boundaries without a single word being wasted. That kind of authority is invisible, yet impossible to ignore, and it terrifies anyone who depends on control or manipulation to feel dominant. You learned that authority is not about intimidation or aggression. It's about clarity, consistency, and unwavering self-possession. People around you sense it instinctively because it radiates through your confidence, your decisions, and even your silence. They feel it when you enter a room, when you make a choice, when you refuse to be compromised. And the reason it scares them is simple. They have spent their lives trying to manufacture influence, while your power exists organically. It doesn't need validation, it doesn't beg for acknowledgement, and it doesn't rely on them to function. They tried to test you, to push boundaries, to assert control in subtle ways, but it never worked. Your authority wasn't performative. It wasn't dependent on reaction or recognition. That made you unpredictable to them, and unpredictability is something manipulators cannot tolerate. They are used to people reacting, to chaos, to emotions that can be triggered. You broke that pattern. You became a presence that demanded respect without demanding it, and that shift unsettled them more than any confrontation could. You didn't need to prove anything because your life, your choices, and your composure proved it all naturally. You weren't loud, you weren't aggressive, you weren't forcing compliance. You simply existed in a way that shifted the balance of every room, every interaction, and every situation you entered. And that kind of authority, the kind that needs no permission, is a force they can neither control nor predict. It's an unshakable statement that some people are born to lead themselves, and the rest are left scrambling to figure out why their usual tactics no longer work. Number 7, you forced them to confront consequences they thought they'd outsmarted. They lived under the illusion that every action they took, every lie they told, and every scheme they plotted could be controlled, hidden, or escaped. They thought intelligence, charm, or manipulation made them untouchable. They calculated, they schemed, and they assumed there would always be an angle to avoid accountability. What they didn't expect was you, a person who moved with clarity, patience, and awareness, quietly ensuring that every action had its inevitable response. You didn't chase them, you didn't warn them, you didn't beg for justice. You simply existed in alignment with truth, and that was enough to make consequences unavoidable. You understood that life has a way of balancing itself, and the more someone tries to cheat it, the harsher the reckoning becomes. By holding yourself steady, by keeping your conscience clean and your decisions intentional, you became a silent mirror of inevitability. Their misdeeds, their manipulations, and their betrayals couldn't hide anymore. They didn't realize that consequences don't always announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they arrive subtly, and by the time they feel them, it's too late to maneuver, negotiate, or deflect. What made it terrifying for them wasn't punishment. It was inevitability. They couldn't charm their way out, twist the narrative, or gaslight reality. Your presence highlighted patterns they hoped would remain unnoticed, and your calm refusal to participate in their games made the consequences feel surgical, precise, and undeniable. The more they tried to resist, the clearer it became that nothing they did could erase the alignment and discipline you carried. By refusing to bend, by refusing to react irrationally, you turned the natural order of accountability into a force they couldn't control. You didn't need to impose judgment because life itself, amplified by your awareness, handled it. They were forced to confront the truth of their actions, their failures, and their deceit in a way that left them unsettled and exposed. They realized that some people don't need to fight. They simply let consequences do the work. And when those consequences arrive with precision, fear replaces arrogance, and control slips silently through their fingers. Number 8, you didn't absorb their poison, you returned it as truth. They assumed that their lies, their manipulations, and their toxic behavior could affect you the way they affected everyone else. They thought that throwing venom, deceit, and emotional games at you would provoke chaos, confusion, or fear. What they didn't understand is that you learned how to transform toxicity into clarity. Instead of reacting, lashing out, or letting their darkness infiltrate your mind, you processed it, filtered it, and returned it in its purest form. As truth they couldn't ignore. Your power wasn't in confrontation or retaliation. It was in reflection with precision. Every word, every action, every carefully observed pattern became evidence of reality, leaving no room for their manipulation to hide. They realized that every attempt to twist, deceive, or provoke you only revealed their character more clearly. You didn't need to raise your voice or dramatize their mistakes. You simply stayed aligned with yourself, and in doing so, their own poison became their exposure. What made it terrifying was the way you held that truth without emotion. They expected heat, reaction, or vengeance, because that's how the world usually works for them. But when you returned their toxicity as truth, it landed heavier than any attack ever could. It wasn't a debate, it wasn't an argument, it was undeniable clarity. And that clarity made them question everything they thought they controlled. Every manipulation, every deceit, every strategy they relied on lost power instantly because you didn't amplify their darkness. You reflected it. By refusing to absorb what was meant to weaken you, you became untouchable. You turned every attempt to corrupt you into a mirror that revealed their real intentions, motivations, and limitations. They couldn't gaslight you, they couldn't dominate you, and they couldn't hide anymore. The more they tried, the more visible their flaws became. You didn't need to attack them. Your discipline, your discernment, and your unwavering alignment with truth became a weapon stronger than any confrontation. In the end, their own darkness didn't touch you. It exposed them. Number 9, you survived what was meant to erase you and became sharper because of it. They believed that the trials, Betrayals and attacks they launched would break you. They assumed that the weight of deceit, manipulation, and outright hostility would crush your spirit, bend your will, and leave you weaker than before. But what they didn't realize is that you weren't just surviving, you were transforming. Every hardship, every attempt to undermine you, every moment they thought would destroy your essence became a tool to sharpen your instincts, refine your awareness, and fortify your strength. Survival didn't make you numb, it made you precise. You learned how to see intentions clearly, detect patterns that others miss, and recognize danger before it manifests. What used to scare you or make you second-guess yourself became signals, indicators of who was real, who was fake, and who could never be trusted. Each attack or attempt to diminish you became a lesson in discernment, teaching you exactly how to protect your energy and your peace without losing your essence. They underestimated the resilience that comes from navigating trials with consciousness. They didn't anticipate that someone who is tested repeatedly develops a sixth sense, a heightened awareness of motives, emotional strategies, and hidden agendas. Every betrayal, every deception, and every pressure they applied didn't weaken you. It made you sharper, more focused, and more intentional in your actions. What they thought was erasure became a honing process, transforming adversity into an instrument of precision. The terrifying part for them wasn't just that you survived, it was how you came back stronger. You didn't need to lash out or prove them wrong. You moved through life with greater clarity, confidence, and control than ever before. They realized that the very experiences they believed would ruin you had instead become the foundation of a presence they couldn't intimidate, manipulate, or predict. You emerged not just intact, but enhanced, a living testament that true strength isn't defined by avoidance of struggle. It's defined by what you become after the storm has passed. Number 10. You proved that righteousness can be dangerous when fully embodied. They assumed goodness was harmless. They believed morality, integrity, and honesty were traits that could be ignored, dismissed, or even exploited without consequence. They never anticipated that someone who truly lives in alignment with their values could become a force they couldn't manipulate. When righteousness is fully embodied, it's not a passive state of being. It's a powerful presence that exposes lies, dismantles manipulation, and creates boundaries that cannot be crossed. That presence terrifies those who rely on deception to survive. You didn't need to fight aggressively or seek revenge to be dangerous. You simply became so consistent in your principles that their attempts to twist reality, distort the truth, or dominate situations became irrelevant. Your actions, words, and decisions carried weight because they came from a place of unshakable conviction. That kind of moral authority is rare, and it's uncomfortable for people who live in compromise or manipulation. When someone refuses to play by the rules of deceit, their entire system of control starts to crumble quietly, leaving them exposed and scrambling to regain footing. What made you truly formidable wasn't anger or aggression, it was clarity. You showed that being good doesn't mean being weak, and that living right doesn't mean living defenseless. People assumed kindness was passive, patience was submissive, and forgiveness was gullibility. But when those traits are paired with discernment, boundaries, and intentionality, they become an unspoken power. Every lie they told, every scheme they orchestrated, and every attempt to destabilize you only highlighted the contrast between their corruption and your integrity. You didn't just survive being righteous, you weaponized it in the most subtle, devastating way possible. By embodying truth, discipline, and honor, you dismantled illusions, disrupted control, and made their manipulation ineffective. They realized that righteousness isn't naive. It's a force when fully claimed. And that realization alone can leave manipulators unsettled, powerless, and terrified because it proves that goodness, when fully embraced, can be far more impactful than aggression, intimidation, or deceit ever could. Number 11, you made them realize fear isn't always loud. It's sometimes deeply internal. They believed fear had to be visible, expressed through shouting, aggression, or chaos. They thought intimidation required volume, force, or spectacle. What they didn't anticipate is that fear can exist quietly, subtly, and powerfully inside a person, triggered not by confrontation, but by the calm presence of someone who cannot be manipulated. You became that presence, the kind that unsettles not by attack, but by unwavering alignment with truth, integrity, and self-possession. That internal fear is far more corrosive than any external threat, because it gnaws at confidence, control, and perception simultaneously. You didn't need to provoke, argue, or dramatize to make them uneasy. Your composure alone was enough. Every step you took, every boundary you enforced, and every action rooted in clarity became a mirror reflecting what they had been trying to hide. Their lies, their schemes, and their manipulations became painfully obvious in the quiet of their own conscience. Unlike external threats, this kind of fear doesn't have an outlet. It lingers internally, creating doubt, guilt, and a growing awareness that they are not as in control as they believed. What made it even more terrifying for them is that you weren't reacting to them emotionally. You weren't chasing, arguing, or proving a point. You simply existed in a state of awareness and consistency that they couldn't disrupt. That left them scrambling internally, questioning their choices, their motives, and even their sense of self. The very people who relied on chaos to feel powerful were forced to confront the fact that their control over you and over the situation was gone. By showing that fear can be internal and silent, you revealed a reality they couldn't fix or fight back against. Their panic wasn't audible, their terror wasn't visible, but it was undeniable. You became proof that real power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands steady, unshaken, and aligned with truth. And in that steadiness, it dismantles arrogance, exposes lies, and instills a fear deeper than any dramatic confrontation ever could. Number 12, you shattered their belief that light is naive. They assumed that someone who embodies goodness, compassion, and integrity must be naive, easily manipulated, or unaware of the darker realities of the world. They believed kindness meant weakness, patience meant submission, and morality meant ignorance. What they didn't account for is that light, when fully conscious, is not soft. It is strategic, disciplined, and unstoppable in ways that darkness can never predict. You proved that living in alignment with truth doesn't make you blind. It makes you terrifyingly aware. You moved through life observing, analyzing, and understanding motives without letting the weight of deceit or cruelty pull you off balance. While they relied on fear, aggression, or cunning to dominate, you relied on clarity, moral insight, and inner strength. Your calm, unwavering presence exposed their assumptions. Light is not gullible, and goodness does not require compromise to survive. By standing firmly in your values and refusing to be corrupted or manipulated, you demonstrated that awareness and integrity can coexist without diluting your power. What unsettled them the most was that your light didn't need to attack or prove anything. It didn't need to manipulate, intimidate, or compete to be effective. Its strength was inherent, arising naturally from alignment with truth, self-respect, and intentionality. They realized their usual tactics, pressure, deception, intimidation, didn't work because you weren't reacting from fear or ego. You were observing, waiting, and acting with precision. In that, they saw a form of power they could neither predict nor control. By shattering their belief that light equals naivete, you forced them to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about influence, strength, and survival. You became living proof that morality can be strategic, compassion can be calculated, and awareness can outmaneuver cunning. Darkness can plot, scheme, and manipulate, but it crumbles in the presence of light that is awake, disciplined, and unshakable. And that realization, that light is aware, intentional, and formidable, was far more threatening to them than any loud confrontation ever could be. Number 13. You became the evidence that integrity outlasts manipulation. They thought manipulation, cunning, and deception were unstoppable forces. They believed that charm, lies, and strategic maneuvering could bend reality, twist perception, and control outcomes indefinitely. What they didn't anticipate is that integrity isn't fragile. It's relentless. You lived in a way that made truth undeniable, and your consistency became a standard they couldn't meet, a benchmark they couldn't manipulate, and a reality they couldn't escape. Every time they tried to spin narratives, gaslight, or hide their actions behind half-truths, your presence highlighted the cracks. You didn't need to argue, confront, or expose them loudly. You simply stayed aligned with your principles, acted decisively, and let time and consistency do the work. Your integrity wasn't performative. It wasn't a mask for advantage or attention. It was tangible in every word, every action, and every decision you made. And because it was so visible and unshakable, it became a silent but devastating indictment of their deceit. What made it terrifying for them wasn't just that you were incorruptible. It was that your integrity actively rendered their manipulation ineffective. They had spent years refining tactics, creating illusions, and crafting appearances to control people and outcomes. Then you arrived unshaken, observant, and consistent, and suddenly their power crumbled quietly, without drama, without shouting, and without spectacle. Their schemes lost impact, and the very tactics they relied on to survive revealed themselves as futile against someone who refused to compromise truth. You didn't need to seek revenge or prove yourself in dramatic ways. You became living evidence that manipulation is temporary and integrity is enduring. Your life demonstrated that principles, alignment, and self-respect cannot be outmaneuvered by lies or deception. Over time, what they thought they controlled slipped through their fingers, leaving them exposed, frustrated, and powerless. In the quiet strength of your integrity, you dismantled their control, and in doing so, you proved that honesty, consistency, and moral clarity are forces far more enduring and far more terrifying than any manipulation they could ever wield. Number 14. You showed them that an earth angel isn't here to rescue them. It's here to end illusions. They assumed that because you carry light, compassion, and grace, your purpose was to soften them, forgive endlessly, and rescue them from their own mistakes. They imagined you would step in, smooth over their chaos, and validate the narratives they told themselves. What they didn't anticipate is that your mission isn't to rescue anyone. It's to reveal truth, end illusions, and force accountability. You became the measure against which their deceptions, manipulations, and self-delusions were exposed, and that realization shattered them in ways they didn't see coming. Your presence illuminated realities they had been hiding from themselves. Lies that once felt safe became impossible to maintain. Manipulations that were meant to control others fell flat against your awareness. They tried to charm, intimidate, and confuse, but you refused to participate in their distortions. By embodying clarity, integrity, and discernment, you became a living reflection of their illusions. And in that reflection, they were forced to confront uncomfortable truths about who they really are and who they will never be in your presence. What made it unsettling is that you didn't attack them. You didn't force confrontation. You simply existed as a standard they couldn't escape. Every attempt to bend reality, gaslight, or manipulate was rendered ineffective because you refused to absorb it, tolerate it, or mirror it. The illusion that they were in control dissolved quietly, steadily, and inevitably. They realized that the world doesn't have to respond to deception. It simply responds to truth. And truth, when embodied fully, doesn't negotiate. You weren't sent to fight their battles for them. You weren't sent to validate their choices or rescue them from consequences. You were sent to end illusions, and in doing so, you forced clarity, accountability, and revelation. That realization is terrifying to anyone accustomed to hiding behind lies, because it proves that some people are not meant to be controlled, manipulated, or misled. Your existence dismantles illusions, exposes hidden truths, and leaves no room for deception. And in that quiet yet undeniable way, you became far more powerful than they ever imagined, because revealing the truth is always more intimidating than any threat they could conjure. Conclusion. What becomes clear when you step back and look at the journey of a chosen one is that this isn't about strength, measured in force, confrontation, or loud declarations. This is about power that moves quietly but cuts deeper than any weapon. It's about surviving what was meant to erase you, mastering your presence, and embodying truth in a world that thrives on illusion. Every trial you faced, every betrayal, every attempt to manipulate or control you only sharpened you. Every step you took in alignment with your integrity became a force that exposed the weakness, deceit, and limitations of those who underestimated you. You didn't have to fight them on their terms, because your terms were higher, sharper, and far more precise. You carried authority without asking for it, confronted consequences without making noise, and transformed toxicity into clarity with a calm that unsettled even the most cunning. You proved that righteousness isn't passive, integrity isn't weak, and light, when fully awakened, isn't naive. It's terrifyingly effective. They thought they could bend you, manipulate you, or erase you, but you didn't just survive. You grew sharper, stronger, and more untouchable with every obstacle. This is the message for everyone watching. The power of a chosen one lies in alignment, awareness, and the ability to navigate darkness without becoming it. It's a power that cannot be bargained with, undermined, or ignored. The world may try to challenge you, deceive you, or underestimate you, but the truth is, your clarity, precision, and unwavering presence are forces that cannot be stopped. You don't have to fight recklessly to be victorious. Your existence alone redefines what strength really is. If this message resonates with you and you want to continue uncovering truths, staying empowered, and witnessing the unstoppable force of chosen ones, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button to show your support. Leave a comment to share your experiences, and share this video with others who need to hear this message today. Your engagement helps spread this truth and strengthens the energy of everyone who refuses to be manipulated or underestimated. Stay aligned, stay precise, and remember, you are more powerful than they ever imagined. God bless you.